2B is a game within the Zen gaming genre, made at the University of Arts London as part of a collaborative project. 2B puts the player in the position of a bee who is determined to rejuvenate the valley it calls home. It is the player's job to collect pollen from the last remaining flowers and deliver that pollen to the beehives dotted around the landscape. In doing so, the player will be able to participate in and witness the regrowth of the valley, bringing life back to their surroundings. The gameplay is focused on bringing a relaxing yet rewarding experience to the player. This is achieved by the reward associated with growing the environment. The sound and the visuals reflect this. In order to regrow the environment, players must collect pollen from nearby flowers. This is demonstrated at the start of the game as so. The player is confined to a small starting zone consisting of 3 flowers and 2 hives. The player must activate the hives before they are able to leave the area. The flowers have a noticeable animation as well as emitting bright yellow particles that draw in the player's attention. Once the player interacts with the flower, the visuals and audio indicate to the player that they have now become pollinated. This will then prompt the player to then investigate the beehive, thus the player will learn the pollination mechanic. The starting area clearly guides the player through their intended purpose within the game, and prepares the player for the rest of the environment outside the starting area. The controls of the game are also demonstrated to the player via icons that appear briefly to depict the buttons used for each movement mechanic. The player is able to move in all directions as well as elevate. This is to simulate the flight of a bee. Once outside the starting area and into the greater environment, players can find 24 more hives to repollinate. The player finds the valley devastated by a hurricane. This is evidenced by the sound of the heavy wind at the beginning of the game and the wind zones that affect the player's movement within the environment, as well as the visual details throughout the world, such as the torn away trees. The wind zones act as an environmental conflict that the player will have to battle against in their mission to revive the valley. The wind is often present to either hinder the player's movement or help the player move around quicker, depending on the direction the player is travelling. Some flowers are already available to the player located within the environment, however each time a new beehive has been activated, more flowers grow, giving the player greater access to pollen and encouraging player exploration. Additionally, once a flower pollen has been collected, the flower ceases to emit pollen. This is to prevent the player from returning to the same flower, thus further encouraging the exploration. Within the world, players can find other animated bees, spiders and birds. These elements add to the immersion and life of the world. The world is made up of different foliage types in order to increase the player's interest in regrowing the environment. There are large open fields, forests, ruins, the river, and autumn trees. As the player explores, the music will change depending on where they are in the world. If the player is travelling across a barren landscape, the music is set to a desolate tone. Once the player has revived a location, the tone in the music changes to reflect the vibrant visuals. This is all to convey a sense to the player that they have had an impact on the environment they inhabit. Once the player has revived the valley by activating all the beehives, the game cuts to a credit scene in which the player is witness to the bee travelling around the environment one last time before retiring back to the starting area to restart the game. During this last journey, the names of all those who dedicated themselves and their hard work to this project play within the scene of the environment. Thank you for exploring 2B.